This afternoon, I'm in Norman, Oklahoma, at the University of Oklahoma Law Library, talking with Darin K Fox, who is the library's director and a professor of law. Darin, you've been the director since 2005, I believe.
Right.
Good. Well, why don't we set the stage and talk a little bit about you as a real person, not that we aren't when we're in our working environments and garb. But could you tell us a little bit about yourself in a more personal sense? Maybe a little bit about your life today and even perhaps when you were young.
Sure. Well, not to go back to, I'll go back to the beginning, but I'll be brief. So I was born in Alaska. My dad was in the military and he was stationed there at Anchorage. And as a result, we moved around quite a bit when I was young while he was going to school after the military. And so we lived everywhere from Ohio to Indiana to Minnesota, and then we got settled in Oklahoma in the 70s, late 70s, and my dad took a job at the OU Health Sciences Center. He was a medic in the military, and he got interested in rural health care. So he was one of the folks that started up the Physician's Assistant Program. So he came here to Oklahoma to run the Physician's Assistant Program when I was just about to start middle school. I was 12. And lived here for many years, except for the brief period where I was in California. Well, not that brief, I guess, 11 years. But so he moved here to be a professor. So I grew up as one of those professor's kids in a college town, which was good for me because I had a bunch of friends who were smarter than I was, and really instilled some good study skills. And then graduated here from Norman High School, actually the town where we are right now. So my alma mater is right here. I graduated from Norman High and then went to undergrad at OU and got a letters degree, and we can go on from there. But just one thing to kind of tell you a little bit about growing up. So as a professor's kid, I hung around a lot of other nerdy kind of kids, and I got interested in technology when I was very young. My dad actually was a professor, and then I don't know if you remember back in the day, before Dell and Compaq got to be very big companies, there were a lot of mom and pop. Before they even existed, there were a lot of mom and pop computer shops.
Oh yeah.
And after he worked at the university for quite some time, he stepped out of the university and opened a computer store.
Oh.
So I spent part of my youth building computers with him as he tried to do that. Now he did that for a few years, and then Compaq and others came along and drove a lot of those mom and pops out of business in the 80s. But that was a great experience building computers, and that's something that stuck with me throughout my whole life.
Well, I'm impressed because the only other person I've ever known who built a computer, really built it, was the man named Don Dennis. He was the director of the library system at the University, American University where I worked. And he didn't have any responsibility for the law library, so he and I got along just fine. He had built a computer. He got it from Tandy, from
Yeah, I remember the Tandys.
Heathkit, I think, and it really worked. And oh, was I impressed.
Yeah.
I knew somebody had built one of those things.
I don't really know. I've never really asked my dad where he got that interest, but from right at the beginning when home computers, even the first Pong system, I don't remember Pong, but there was Pong, was sort of the first home video game. And
I remember that too.
every single computer from then on, from the Commodores to the Apple, if you remember, the Apple II was quite popular in the late 70s.
Oh, very much.
And then he got into IBM PCs, and we had one of every one of them. We even had a little, if you remember, Timex made a computer called the Timex Sinclair.
Oh, yes. I
remember that?
The Sinclair. The Timex, I don't remember that part of the name. But.
Timex Sinclair.
Yeah.
And we had one of those. It was just a little square, much about the size of an iPad nowadays. Its only screen was about a 4-row by 20 character screen. That was the whole screen for the computer.
I imagine it didn't cost the same as an iPad today.
Gosh, I'm trying to remember how much it
be
cost.
considerably more
I
expensive.
think it was $1,000 for that little thing.
Yeah.
Which was a lot of money back then.
Yes.
But if you think about that, and then what else was going on in the 70s and 80s? So Carl Sagan was on PBS with his Cosmos series. Of course, Star Wars came out in 1977.
Some obscure movie franchise that I guess we're about ready to get another one.
That's right, yeah. And so
this is the year 2015 that we're talking.
Yeah. Almost. Is that almost 40 years?
It comes out on Christmas, I think, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does come out. We have our my son is 15, so we have our advance tickets to go that weekend already purchased.
I have a son who's a tad bit older. He's in his mid-40s, but I think he's probably got tickets too if anyone's going to have them, because he was really part of that as a kid.
I was at a conference speaking about some of the technology projects we have going on. I'm sorry, actually it was an OU alumni lunch just a couple of weeks ago. And at the end of that program, I told them about Star Wars. And these are a bunch of mostly older lawyers, and I told them, even if you don't care about this, you probably have kids that do, and you better get tickets now, because when Thanksgiving comes around and it starts to come up around the holiday table, the dinner table, you'll have your tickets.
Well, some of us are avid movie buffs, but we always watch them at home in the family room with the TV.
Yeah. Nowadays
so
you can
I'm
do
waiting, and I'm assuming even that one will be on Blu-ray disc within a few months.
And with TVs now, it's just as beautiful as if you were sitting in the
and
movie
nobody's
theater.
chewing popcorn.
That's right. Nobody's feet are on
doing
the back
it
of your
yourself.
seat. Yes. But anyway, all of that has sort of built up into a love of technology and science fiction, and that's a big part of my background.
So we'll blame the Force for all
Blame
of
the
that
Force
stuff.
for part of my career path, yes.
Yeah, why not?
Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, and Bill Gates. Well, and Steve Jobs, let's not forget Steve.
Steve Jobs was he took a company that looked like it was going to collapse off and on for years.
It did.
Build it into one of the most successful companies out there, from what at least the Wall Street people say about it, even today.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, that sort of sets the stage, and I suspect I may already know the answer to some of this.
Yeah.
But I'd like to follow up by asking you if you have any particular hobbies or special passions or pursuits with which you occupy time, presumably outside of work, in case the dean watches this.
Mm-hmm.
We'll say it that way.
Well, technology is a big part of it. And, one of the things about having a hobby that is technology, and this was true in the 80s just as true as it is today. Of course, today, when technology is your hobby, you end up helping so many people who are interested in technology but don't necessarily have the skills with it. And that was true from the very beginning. I mean, when people were building their own PCs or needed a PC, helping folks, understand. Kind of think of it in terms of sort of maybe the automobile. We're not all that far into computer technology. We're about maybe almost 40 years. Well, think about cars, and how much you had to know the first 40 years of cars if you wanted to try to go across the country. It's a similar kind of thing where there's problems that are beyond just going into a store and buying some replacement part and putting it in yourself. We still have those problems, but now today those problems are more software problems where people just don't know how to use them. And that's even true for something as simple as an iPad. Or an Apple Watch or an iPhone. A lot of folks have these things now because it's becoming ubiquitous, but they don't necessarily know how to use them well.
That's sort of how could we live without a smartphone? And yet 5-6 years ago was when the first one came along.
That's right. It's amazing to think it's 2015 now. The iPad's only been around for 5 years, and think about how widespread the iPad is now.
Yeah.
I think computers
or the similar ones from the other companies that you see them all over.
Yeah, the other Android or Windows tablets. Yeah. So that's probably my main hobby, and then of course just movies, sci-fi and running. To get away from the technology, I think. Just for
I'll bet you're carrying it on your first.
Actually, you have to now.
Run.
Back in the day, you didn't have to. You just ran just to be healthy.
Well, iPhone or similar gadgets will count the steps now and tell you if you've run enough.
Your watch, actually, yeah.
Is that how it does it?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, yes, now I'm carrying both a phone and a watch, and they're both talking to me about my pace and, every run
Do they ever disagree? And they're wits end trying to figure out to make a real decision on your own?
Yeah, it's really interesting because now you can know with. I ran in a race, an OU race. It's a Healthy Sooners race, I guess it was about two months ago, and we've got some road construction going on here, and so one road.
Tell me about it. The street my GPS told me I was supposed to turn up, and then kept ordering me to make a U-turn. Had a big pile of dirt in the middle of the road.
Yes, the road right in front of the law school has been torn up but there's another road that's also being constructed very nearby, and they opened part of it between the time that they mapped the route and the time that the race started. And this confused the people who were running the race.
Oh.
And so they accidentally had people turn up this road that was too short. And so now there's many hundreds or 1,000 people that were in this race. So we get to the home stretch, and everybody, almost everybody in the field is looking at it going, there's no way there's a half a mile left. I can see the finish line. And I crossed the line knowing that the race was 2.66 miles when it's supposed to be 3.1 miles. So
your technology lets you know that.
Yes, I thought, and if they didn't know that, they thought they had run a record time.
Probably the next generation or two will put it to you quite bluntly. Darin Fox, you're cheating. You have not run as far as we were told we were supposed to
Yes.
win this race.
Well, I'm sure I may have disappointed some people because I posted it on Facebook, after the race, and I'm sure that information got around to the folks who weren't. But nowadays, most everybody's got a GPS phone.
Oh, sure.
That's telling them how far they've gone.
Yeah.
So
No,
I used to be able to
interesting
get away.
technology, and they tell me things I read and hear from the real experts is with the increasing capacities, we haven't seen anything yet compared to what will probably be available in a few years.
Well, and that's exciting because just think about even just something like entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
How many more options we have now.
Yeah.
Plus, anyway, not just frivolous things, but we could go on. That's a whole separate discussion.
Maybe on that basis, not just frivolous things, maybe we should move on to the beginning about your career, and we get into that by finding out about your academic background. I know you mentioned that you had a degree in letters or something, but I believe.
Well, I didn't start out that way.
You have about 3 degrees.
So I told you about Carl Sagan,
Yeah.
and he's one of my heroes,
Mm-hmm.
and so I went into undergrad thinking I wanted to be an astronomy major,
Okay.
and I actually was an astronomy major for 1 year, and would have continued with it. I mean, I really enjoyed it. But I did the calculus for majors class my freshman year, and I got a B minus. And it's kind of at that point
That's not a very high grade for somebody wanting to go into one of the sciences.
So it's kind of like making it to the NBA. You start to then have conversations with people about what does it take to actually have a career in astronomy, and you start to realize that it's kind of like making it to the NBA or making it to the NFL, and you have to start thinking about what do you really want to do. So. For me, it was great because it allowed me to step back and think about what are my other interests. And I was in the Latin club in school, and I liked politics and philosophy and things like that. So I switched over into letters, and OU has a great letters program, and enjoyed doing that. And so I graduated with that degree. And I took a lot of political science and philosophy classes in undergrad, and I really enjoyed that. That's where I got interested in law. And like probably a lot of letters graduates and poli-sci graduates, you get interested in constitutional law, right, as an undergraduate.
Sure. Full
of idealism, and those are the fun classes when you're an undergrad. Then you realize constitutional law is kind of like making it to the NBA too. The number of people that actually practice constitutional law are about as, you know, it's a sort of rarefied air, kind of like
And I
people
think
who
even then, some of them
astronomy.
are still professors of one sort or another in law schools.
Yeah, so I went through, you know, law school here at OU, and really enjoyed it. Maybe wasn't, you know, nowadays students are so much more focused, and we can talk about some of the things I do for the law school here. I'm seeing students come through today that are much more focused, partly maybe because of the cost, partly just because of their, you know, the support system that's there for them as they're going through school, maybe more information available to them. But anyway, I was one of those folks who had a sort of a general interest and, you know, wanted to explore it. I did work for a couple law firms. You know, it was okay. By the time I got done with it, I still really wasn't sure. I interned at a criminal defense firm and a family law firm, and just still wasn't quite sure. And I knew I had this technology interest. And so when I got out of law school, I thought, well, what am I going to do? You know, do I want to try to go into practice? I took the bar and passed the bar, and do I want to go into practice? And I started looking around my third year. What do I want? What are my options? And Scott Pagel, who is the director at George Washington,
That's right.
was the director here when I was in law school here.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember going to talk to him, and he gave me some information about library and information science. And I started looking around at programs, and I found Illinois, which has been, you know, one of the top-rated schools
Good school.
for a long, long time. And I decided to go ahead and apply there,
Mm-hmm.
and got in there, and I've been lucky in many respects in the timing of my career, which I'll build on this. But one of the ways I got lucky about this was they have this program up there, SERL. It's an Army Corps of Engineers facility that's up there in Champaign, Illinois, and they use this base. They hire library school students to essentially read the CFR and research also foreign law, and turn the environmental chapters of the CFR into these guides that Army base commanders can use to make sure that they are following the regs.
Mm-hmm.
And that fit perfectly. I didn't know this at the time, but they knew it. And so they gave me a full scholarship there, and also a job working at this place, Searle, just on the north side of town. And I ended up there. And what interested me at first was the fact that they were focused on technology. This is a very techie, and they have, you know, one of the premier sort of distance education library programs, library and information science programs right now. And they were forward looking in that regard, even back in the 90s. Mm-hmm. So that was wonderful. I was lucky to have Scott Pagel here to talk to, and just by coincidence, you know, this was 92, 93, so this was right before the birth of the web. Mm-hmm. So things that were going on at the time were like Gopher. Do you remember Gopher servers?
Oh yeah.
Text-based, you know, distribution of information. So there were Gopher servers, and then they were working on the web. And when I got to Illinois, there was this program. I had no idea it was going to become what it was, but there was this program called Mosaic. And so the very first version of Mosaic was NCSA Mosaic, and that's the Illinois National Center for Supercomputer Applications. And NCSA Mosaic was there, and we were using it at Illinois, and just thinking, oh, this is great. This is so much better than Gopher. We can put images and stuff, and it's, you know, it's got better formatting, and you can publish better with it. And so I came away from there having already having experience with Mosaic, and anyway, I took that into my first job, and we were able to take classes there, like programming classes and stuff.
Now this was while you were still working on the degree?
This is when I was there, 92, 93 is the exact sort of 2-year period that they were developing Mosaic, because in 94, that's when things got pretty widespread with the web. and universities all over the place were picking it up and creating these websites.
Yeah, didn't Mosaic then sort of morph into Netscape?
Yep, so Mosaic became
Yeah.
Netscape, which became Firefox, exactly, you got it right,
It's
yep.
the one I tend to use,
Yep.
yeah.
And they just by coincidence just released Firefox for the iPad just about a month ago.
Yeah, I got prompted to load it and I was busy, so I told it, no, I'll do it later.
Yep.
Yeah, it still harasses me now and then until later comes as far as it was concerned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's how I ended up with the 3 degrees.
Okay, so now you have 3 degrees and you decide you're going to get a job with these various degrees, and maybe Scott had a hand in your choice, but you end up out in Los Angeles
Yeah.
at Southern California,
Yeah.
the University of Southern California Law School
Yeah.
Library.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was your next job as computer services librarian.
Yeah. So another way.
Tell us a little bit about that era in life.
Yeah, another way that I got lucky in the timing of my career was I was graduating from library school right at the time that libraries were starting to recognize the need to have librarians with computer expertise.
Yes.
I mean, that was the birth of that new genre, that new classification of librarian, computer services librarian. It really just started right there in the early 90s.
Yeah. And here you've been working, doing all this work.
Yep, and it just led right
in
into
Illinois.
it. Yeah, and where it started was, just libraries needing people to run the computer labs who were also librarians.
Yeah.
And of course it grew so far, it's grown so far beyond that, but that was the original impetus. And then I think probably some schools also, when they realized, hey, there's the web and we need somebody to deal with the web, not even thinking at this point about classroom technology, which was going to become a huge, huge area. So yeah, I got lucky that Albert, was forward thinking about technology, and there was a person that was there for just a couple of years who then moved on, and so I applied and got that job, and it was absolutely perfect timing because I got to be involved in setting up the first website for the USC Law School. In fact, I think I was the one that set up the first website for the law school, and maintained it for probably a half a dozen years or so before it became more of a pressing institutional thing with all the different departments needing to have content there, and so that was lucky timing for the start of my career.
Well, lucky in that sense too, but you worked with some super people and superstar people as well. Albert Breck we've talked about. Tell us about some of the folks you got to know there, many of whom may still be active in our field and more.
Well, Albert, was my first mentor really, and he was something else. I mean, he expected professionalism from his staff. He expected us to be engaged in the profession. He had everyone set up on a librarian kind of continuing appointment. And certainly service was number one with him. That was the highest priority, is a high level of service in our job to the school, engagement with the profession, scholarship to the extent you had time to contribute to the scholarship of the profession. But really it was the main thing I got from him was the high level of service, no guessing, and then I just happened to be there with Paulina Ronis. She was the associate director. It was right before she went to Vanderbilt to be the director there for some time, and Paul George. Both of them were there for the first year that I was there, and Paul's at Penn, and and I was the junior person, and they were sort of the senior team, and so they were big influence on me. Then the other group of folks that were there at the beginning of my career were all of the computer services SIS people, which if you remember back in the day was called the Automation and something.
Scientific development.
There you go, Automation and Scientific Development,
I
SIS.
remember.
Yeah, so that was the old name for the computer services folks.
Well, one does have to keep up with the times.
So that changed, I think, probably right around the time I started. It was about around the mid-90s, mid to late 90s maybe. The name of it changed to the Computer Services SIS. And there were a whole generation of us that were starting in that line at the same time. And it was people like Ken Hirsch, who was at Duke for a very long time and is at Cincinnati now. James Duggan, who's at Tulane now, but he was computer services librarian at Southern Illinois for a long time under Frank.
Yeah.
And June Liebert, who went to Texas for quite some time and was the CIO in Texas, and is now working for Sidley Austin, a big law firm.
Yeah.
So there were a group of us that were, and there's others I'm sure that I just haven't named, but those were some of my good friends, and they were wonderful to have as colleagues in the 90s.
Now, somewhere along through the 90s, you got a fancy title too, or fancier title. You were associate dean for technology.
Yeah. So part of what happened in the 90s is that as technology became increasingly important to law schools, there were different models that sprang up, and Albert was one of those that wanted to take on the challenge of running IT for the school as a whole, and I think most people probably thought at the time that there were some benefits to doing it. Librarians, I think sometimes it just happens that the librarians were the most techie people in the building.
Well, we tended early on to use more of the things you needed technology for.
Right, because we had our catalogs.
Lexis, Westlaw, things like that.
Right.
And as you said, it was becoming something that might have some benefits that classroom use and others.
Yeah.
But they weren't all really quite manifest yet.
Yeah. There's sort of two, there's a spectrum, sort of technology use in law schools, but you can see how, how this can happen where librarians get pulled in. Part of it is customer service.
Yeah.
So, we are experts at the reference interaction, which maps over almost identically to the computer troubleshooting, computer use sort of assistance that somebody would need. And that was exactly the case at USC, is that, Albert was interested in having that kind of service orientation applied to the IT function throughout the school. And so we had some turnover. Just LA is a place where there's a lot of opportunities, and so we had some turnover and created a path for me to start. I started in the computer lab and doing that and working with the students. And this is as laptops became increasingly popular, and they needed somebody at the school to support them using their laptops and maintaining their laptops, in addition to the computer labs, which were so important for teaching and just getting your work done back then, that it created that mechanism for me to start in the library and eventually grow into running technology for the whole school. And so I actually got pulled away from librarianship. I always taught legal research.
About that. When you became associate dean then, you were no longer basically part of the library itself?
I still was a librarian. I still taught the first year legal research program with the rest of the public services staff.
Did you report to Albert?
Always reported to Albert.
Okay, so it was really under the library that you were building this new little fiefdom.
Well, it was under Albert.
Yeah.
So Albert was an associate dean. I became, an assistant director, then the director of IT. Eventually I became an assistant dean and an associate dean, but at the same time, Albert became the chief information officer.
Okay.
So he may have been the first academic chief information officer for a law school. This would have been back around 2000.
Yeah.
Is when he got that.
Still pretty early in the development. and
Pretty
evolution.
early, yeah. And of course, then later June was CIO at Texas, but Albert got that title, and he really was over all of the information services function at USC, and yeah.
Well, even though you were having all this fun and doing all these interesting things out in California, I noticed that about 2005, the draw of home must have surfaced,
Yeah.
or at least a nice offer or whatever attracted you back here to Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And you came here to the job you now hold.
Mm-hmm.
Can you
Yeah,
tell us a
so-
little bit about that transition?
Well, I really didn't want to leave California, but I wonder how often this comes up with folks who do live in California who grew up somewhere else.
I understand a lot of them grew up elsewhere that do live there.
Yeah, but I mean, so what happened with my wife and I is we were living there, enjoying working there, and the real estate bubble, So we had the crash in 2008, but the bubble was inflating, for many years before that. And as we looked around, so my son was born in 2000, and as he got older, we were just thinking about his schooling, and when he got to be about 3 or 4 years old, it sort of hit us in the face, even just trying to get him into preschool back. And this is 10 years ago. I can only imagine the way it is now. But, you had to interview. He had to interview for spots, in good preschools in California. Mm-hmm. It's not like you just sign up. You have to, your son, it's separately from us interview.
Brought your kid there and dropped him off, and the teachers
Right.
took care of it from there on.
Right.
No longer prevailed, huh?
So when he got to be 4, we had to make a decision because we didn't really want to move him around once he started school.
Yeah.
So I imagine a lot of people make this decision. So we were watching the real estate bubble just blow up and blow up and blow up. And I remember the house that we were renting at the time. We had bought a house and sold it, and we were renting this house by Caltech, which was a beautiful area. Mm-hmm. When we moved into it, the price was $550,000. We had asked them, and we thought about it, but we never pulled the trigger. And
that wasn't exactly chump change, even at that level.
No, but by 2.5 years later, when we asked them, that same house was $750,000.
Yeah.
And so we had to make a decision. Were we going to stay here in LA and pay the costs associated with that, or were we going to move back to Oklahoma or some area near there, closer to our family? Mm-hmm. My wife's parents were getting to be upper 60s. They're now in their late 70s, and my folks were just a little bit behind them. So we decided we would try to come back, and just got lucky that this position opened up in 2005, and that's how we ended up back here.
Yeah. Well, you've had some exciting times here. Could you describe some of those and some of the projects and so on that you've undertaken?
Yeah. So when I was at SC, I spent a lot of time with classroom technology. That's really when PowerPoint was born, mm-hmm. and educators started thinking about how to use PowerPoint. Not always well, but so in addition to the web, PowerPoint was how I spent a huge, not just PowerPoint, but video in classrooms and instructional technology. That was a huge part of the 90s and the early 2000s, and the web. When I got here, technology was more in place, right? So the web was there, and folks were using instructional technology. And here we had sort of the next evolution of things happening in the mid 2000s, and especially after the crash of 2008. Mm-hmm. There were specific library projects, but then there were also things that were changing law practice as a whole. So one of the things that has driven stuff that's gone on here has been after the crash, the legal market experienced its crash about a year or two later.
Yeah.
Because what happened in law schools, and this is now really affecting law schools today. This is a major issue, major fallout from the last recession. But technology really took hold in law firms after the crash, and companies started turning to law firms and saying, "You've got to be more efficient. We have had to be more efficient with technology. You must be more efficient with technology."
So there was pushback from clients.
Pushback from clients, which drove the firms to, at first after the crash, hiring shut down, and this eventually fed into law schools classes, law school applications. Really, we're just now starting to see the bottom of that trend. But that change in law practice has created, right now, a whole bunch of needs for changes in legal education. And that is affecting librarians, for sure. It's affecting IT folks. It's affecting law professors and how we deliver what we do in law schools. So one of the big projects that has been happening here is we took a look at, you may remember about 3 years ago, the ABA actually changed one of its rules of professional responsibility. It's the very first rule on competence. And they added in a comment that says that lawyers must be aware of the risks and benefits of using technology. They can no longer have their heads in the sand. That is a part of the competence rule now. That is an indication of the wider culture of law firms needing to use technology. And it started out at the big firms, of course, and is making its way into the smaller firms kind of as we speak. But one big project that's going on here right now is something that we call the Digital Initiative. And it's really a technology training program. I'm sitting here looking at an iPad that's in a nice keyboard case. And it looks essentially like a little 1.5 pound laptop. And we're using this. Last start of the 2014 school year, we applied for a grant to our university and got a $300,000 grant from the main campus to buy iPads for the entire student body, the entire JD student body. So every student has one of these iPads that looks kind of like a mini laptop. And last year was the first year. We're halfway through the second year of it. And the point of it is it's a vehicle for technology training. And part of the idea of our dean was to make the technology ubiquitous among students. Have everyone has these in their hands, and we will train them, but then they will also discover ways to be efficient in their studies and potentially take these things into practice. And so that is a new project that the library is leading here. And this actually caused us, when we had a couple of retirements recently, to take a position and change it into a digital resources librarian. And we very specifically went out and found someone who had 5 years of experience running a small law firm, who was responsible for all the technology in his law firm. And he has come in and has and he's very tech savvy, very into this. He had to be. Because he ran the case management system, the billing system, the trial software, everything that you could in a law firm. So he comes with just wonderful background to take this project and continue it on into the future. And we're starting to get little bits and little pieces of feedback where someone will graduate and they'll send you a picture where they're sitting in a courtroom. And even a small little county courthouse where there's no technology in the courthouse except a 50 or 60 inch monitor stuck to the wall with a cable hanging down, and that's it. And they're sitting there with their iPad using something like TrialPad, and they're running the evidence in some criminal case while their boss is doing the arguing. And those are the kind of things we want to see come out of this project.
I'm sitting on other side of the camera from me right now, and we have the camera plugged into a port here in the middle of the table. And I've been sitting here looking at the screen that's up above that port that comes up, folds up when you open this access point. And I'm terribly impressed just looking at the titles. There's a little screen in the middle so you can display whatever. And then on one side there are a whole row of buttons. There are about 5 of them. One is labeled DVD, and I know what that is. Another one's Apple TV, so I imagine it has to do with those iPads.
Yep.
And then there's one for laptops in case somebody has the other technology, I guess. And then Blu-ray and video record.
Yeah.
And on the other side, I won't describe all those. I'm taking too much of your time, but
Yeah.
but it's impressive seeing some of the
Yeah. Well, what
electronic information gadgets that you
Yeah.
all have these days.
Well, what you're describing is it's kind of an offshoot of this this change in lawyer culture and lawyer relationships with their clients.
Yeah.
You know, there's always been this ebb and flow of theoretical knowledge of folks coming out of school and practical knowledge.
Yes.
And it will often try to work its way back to the theoretical, and the legal community tries to pull it then back to the practical side. And boy, when this last recession hit, and this is where technology really took hold in some of these firms because the clients really pressed it. And so what's happened is we've just pegged out on the practical side right now. And these rooms are one offshoot of that, because when you need to do more skills training like that, you need to have facilities for students to, we hear a lot about more collaboration. So you need to have a mechanism for students to collaborate more, use the technology that they are assigned, use technology that they have, so you can collaborate in these rooms. Multiple students can come in. And we built these rooms, just 7 years ago, and the idea was that you'd hook up multiple laptops with video cables and you just trade off
There are a whole number of little ports.
who's showing their screen as you tried to outline or work on a piece of writing or something together. Nowadays,
And you have a big screen on the wall. Again, it's off camera. And there are actually 4 of these ports, like the one I just described. You're talking about now.
So trying to keep
on
up
this one table
with the evolution of it, you mentioned there's a DVD button. Well, most students don't have a DVD player anymore. There's no DVD player in this iPad. So that's why there's an Apple TV there, because you're going to stream the video.
Send it by wireless.
It's coming over the cloud, and so they're using the Apple TV to wirelessly connect and display. So keeping and we're just about to do a $1.5 million renovation. Actually, the folks that funded these rooms, Inasmuch Foundation of Oklahoma City, that we're sitting in right now, they also have given us a bigger gift, $1.5 million, for sort of part 2 of this ongoing effort to keep our facilities up to date. And we're going to renovate the main service area and make it very modern and high tech, and with elements like flipped seminar rooms. So nowadays you hear people talking about flipping the classroom and doing more.
You mean buying and selling law schools? No, not quite.
Yeah, no. Well, I think in this context they mean flipping how time is spent, and so we're going to actually have a seminar room that's flipped, which has monitors all around the walls, with a monitor assigned to each table, and students now do interactive exercises together in class as opposed to just listening to a lecture. They do more of the reading, outside of class, and some of the discussion outside of class, and they have these activities that they do in class. So we're building a classroom, which will be the first one, and then there's another one planned, a bigger one. So that's just one aspect of how facilities are changing.
Rather fascinating, especially to someone of my vintage who was part of this as it all began. And as a director, my big role was to convince the funding people that, one, we needed tons of money to pay for it, and two, that this was needed.
And let's see, where was I going to go with that? Oh, so what makes this kind of stuff possible is the change in how how we're viewing library space nowadays. And so that construction project we're going to do downstairs over the next spring and summer, that's only possible because ebooks, because of the changing nature of collections. And certainly we've made huge changes in the primary law that we collect in print. It's very small compared to what it was when I started in 2005, where we had everything. The only thing that had been canceled in 2005 were just shepherds in print, and we still had the Oklahoma shepherds. But now they're all gone. All the print shepherds, the digests are gone. Most of the reporters are gone. Most all of the West statutes are gone, replaced by the official statutes, so much cheaper. But it won't be long before those are gone, and library space will be used, will be used differently. Yeah. One interesting thing, just to tell you real quick about ebooks, and then I'll stop, is just we just finished our first year of actually collecting monographs by demand-driven ebook program. Oh. So we have this EBL, and we have 13,000 titles now in the catalog that are just ebook titles, and it's just K classified titles, and we make them available to the whole campus. And we just did a study and found that we spent $11,000 in 1 year to give access to $85,000 worth of material. And the way that works is, you get a 5-minute free browse of the titles. You can pay a smaller amount for a 1-day loan, and you can pay a slightly bigger amount for a 7-day loan of the title. And then after so many loans, you purchase it. Okay. The library purchases it automatically. Yeah. And so all of those charges add up to $11,000, but all of the things that were touched, $85,000.
It looks like it's a fiscally a wonderful new arrangement.
Yeah.
Especially in this day and age of increasing costs and decreasing budgets.
Yes, and our budget has been, essentially flat for the entire time that I've been here.
So, Darin, I know before we began today, you said that you had an appointment coming up.
Yes, I do.
In just a few minutes, and actually now it's in just a few minutes.
Yeah.
So rather than perhaps go on a little bit, let me pose a couple of other quick topics that you can respond to perhaps quite rapidly. You are a faculty member and you teach. Can you briefly describe that part of your role?
Yeah, so another way I've been kind of lucky is I've been at 2 schools where the librarians have been in charge of teaching the first year legal research class. And I really think that's essential. It's essential. I think it's a wonderful thing if you can be doing it, because you establish we live our lives in online databases. We spend a lot of time supporting faculty research. We know these tools inside and out, and we can provide a neutral point of view to students as to the lay of the land in any given year. And I really think that's beneficial to the students, but it's also beneficial to the school to have the librarians in the classroom developing a relationship with the students, because it lasts for the entire 3 years that you're there, and it makes them better library users. So teaching that, and then also teaching the advanced research class, which, boy, that has changed over the years to incorporate so much technology now. So those are the 2 main classes that I've taught.
Well, I won't go into detail, and I know we need to be quite brief at this point, but I also note that you have become active in scholarship, professional service to some extent. You've been involved with the consortium, Mid-America Consortium, as president, I believe, at one point. Yeah. So you get I don't know if it's the short straw or the vote of your confidence.
Well, I have John Edwards to thank for that. John Edwards is the director at Drake, and he, after I left SWAL, I had a whole new group of local directors to get to know in MAL, Mid-America. Yeah. And John was my mentor in MAL and got me involved in MAL. And it's good to have those chapters because all of us from sort of North Dakota to Oklahoma and Arkansas and Missouri, we are all very similarly situated schools with generally modest budgets, so that's a really good group of folks to be networking with, and it's a very active chapter, and that consortium has been very active too, and so yeah.
Well, one of the advantages of my talking to you today at this point in your career is you have a lot of time ahead, and I know that by the time you get around to retirement, if it's still allowed at that point in your life, the systems to support old folks haven't changed too much.
Can I just say one more thing real quick about scholarship,
Yeah,
just in case anybody's listening to me at this point? I would just say try to find a place. I don't consider myself really a scholar. I've worked more on computer projects for most of my career, but to the extent that you do get engaged in scholarship, try to find something that overlaps with your specific interests. I just finished one chapter that I did enjoy writing, and that is in one of Michelle Wu's books, Academic Library Director Perspectives. But my chapter was on library and data. And we really haven't even touched on some of the things that this job can expand into in the future. I have spent quite a bit of my time the last 5 years doing competitive intelligence, sort of academic competitive intelligence, where you deconstruct all of the ranking surveys, you know the ABA questionnaires, the U.S. News questionnaires, Princeton Review, all those things inside and out, and can advise your administration on those things. And we are the information gatherers, the information providers. And as education becomes more business-like, that's an incredible growth opportunity. And so I took that interest and wrote one chapter on libraries and data, which describes all of these different data sources that you can get this competitive intelligence stuff for folks who come after.
Yeah, well, you've got a ways ahead of you, and I think by the time people look at your CV and, when you are much more senior, it's going to be loaded with some very interesting and probably very useful projects that you will have been involved in. Certainly have been up until now.
Yeah, well, thank you.
And, so maybe by way of that, I should ask you, Darin, if there's anything that we haven't talked about. I know your meeting is coming up, and I don't want to get you in trouble with all the others that might be involved or whatever.
No.
Is there anything we haven't talked about that you'd like to bring up at this point?
Oh man.
We talked about a lot of interesting things.
Yeah, I think I've said my bit.
Good. Well then, Darin Fox, I want to thank you for taking the time today to talk with me here on camera for the oral history project of Spinelli's Law Library Reference Shelf of Hein Online.
Yeah, thank you so much for reaching out to me. It's been fun.
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it.